In this tutorial video, I'll be showing you everything you need to know to get started with creating your own Discord bots. We'll go through a basic introduction and setting everything up. After this, we will create a basic moderation bot as well as a music bot. And finally, I'll show you how to host these bots on the internet for free. Before we start, please remember to like the video, subscribe, and turn on the bell notifications so you never miss an upload. Also, check out my other social media to see updates on the projects I'm currently working on. And if you'd like to support me further, please consider checking out my Patreon account. Let's get into the video. Before we can start coding, we need to do some setup first. First thing you have to do is create a Discord server where you can actually test the bot. So I have one here. You can create your own by clicking the plus button here at the bottom left and just following the steps. The second step would be to search this on Google or just go to this link. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on this one here and then go to applications at the top left. These are all your Discord applications. You can create a new one by clicking the new application button at the top right. I'll be calling mine tutorial bot. Create, and then I'm a human. Okay, you can give your application a description. You can give it some tags, but we're mostly interested in this bot tab here on the left. So go ahead and click that. And here you can actually give your bot an image, which is pretty nice. You can give it a banner as well. The username is here. This token is going to be important later. And then here, I just want to quickly talk about these intents. Intents are basically permissions that your bot has. So here, message content intent is pretty important. That actually allows the bot to look at messages. So I'm going to click on save changes here after enabling it, because that's a pretty important one. And then that's pretty much all on this page. Now we need to make the bot join the server. To do that, you go to the OAuth 2 tab here on the left and then scroll down a bit. This is a bot that we're making, so I just select bot. And then here, you should only choose the things that your bot's actually going to do. But to make things simple for myself and for the tutorial, I'm just going to click on administrator. To make the bot join, we should copy the link that it generated at the very bottom of the page. I'm going to go and paste that here in a new tab. And then, okay, there, it opened in Discord. So here, you have to choose the server where you want to add the bot. So I'm going to click on test server because that's the one I just made. And then here's where it asks me if I'm going to allow this bot to have administrator, which I'm just going to allow because obviously for the tutorial. And then I am human. There we go. Okay, and there we go. The bot has successfully joined the Discord server. So now that the bot joined the server, we can go ahead and give the bot some logic. So we're going to start writing code. I'm going to right click. I'm going to create a new folder. And then I'm going to call this Discord bot, but you can call this whatever you want. Inside of this folder, we're going to store the entire project. What I'm going to do in this folder is I'm going to create a Python virtual environment. Now, if you don't know what that is, I'll give a quick explanation. A Python virtual environment is basically an isolated workspace that doesn't interfere with any of the Pythons installed on the system. Now, here's a good example of why we use these environments in the first place. Sometimes you might be working on a bunch of different projects, right? And some of these projects might be dealing with facial recognition. Let's say they all use the same library for this facial recognition feature, but they need different versions of the same library. What would end up happening is they would all conflict with each other because this application needs, for example, version 1.2, and the other one needs version 1.5, and the other one 2.0. Now, to manage that, a Python virtual environment would be perfect because all of them would have their own isolated workspace where they can install the libraries that they need, the versions that they need as well. So that's what I'm going to do inside of this Discord bot folder. We're going to do most of this in the terminal or command prompt. Now, we could right click and open this folder in terminal, but I've had permission errors in the past, so I'm going to just open an administrator instead. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click here. I'm going to copy this path right there by clicking Control C. I'm going to go to search, type in CMD, and then I'm going to click on command prompt, or at least right click, run as administrator, and then click on yes, of course. And then I want to actually change directory. So I want to go into this folder from this. So I'm going to say CD, change directory, and then I'm going to paste that path and press enter. And now we're inside of this directory there. So you can see we're inside of the folder we just created. Now we can actually go ahead and install the tools we're going to use to create this Python virtual environment we've been talking about so much. So pip install virtual env, and then press enter. Don't worry if yours looks different, it's just because I already have this installed. Now that we have the tool to create virtual environments, I'm gonna go ahead and, create it. So virtual env, if I spell it correctly, virtual env, and then I'm gonna call it DC env. This is just gonna create a folder inside of this other folder we made, which is gonna be the virtual environment. So this folder, I'm just gonna press enter so long. This folder here is going to be the virtual environment. I don't think it's registering. Wait. Oh, I did spell it wrong. Oh, I see. I switched my A and my U. Okay. But regardless, there we go. Just spell it the same way. Here, it created the folder for us. So I'm going to open this just to show you. This lib folder is going to contain all of our libraries, I guess. And this scripts folder actually contains a bunch of important files, specifically these activate, which is actually going to activate the environment for us. Because currently this environment's not active yet. If we were to run a Python program from this terminal, we'd be using system Python. Now, in order to actually use our environment, we need to activate it so that if we do run a Python application, we use this environment to run that Python application. So to do that, we have to go to this scripts folder here and activate these files, but I'm going to do it from here because we need a terminal to actually do it. So I'm going to do cd, and I'm going to actually change directory into this DC-env folder we made. So DC_env, enter, and then we're inside of it now, as you can see. And then I'm gonna do cd scripts, and then we're inside of scripts. We could have just done this in one step, but doesn't matter. We got to where we should be. And then I'm gonna do, I think it's just activate. Yeah, it's just activate. Okay, so you just type activate, and since we're in command prompt, it should have used the activate.bat one. These other ones, as far as I'm concerned, are for different shells. So here on the left, this is indicating that we're currently using the environment we made. So if I were to run a Python application now, it would be using this environment. It would be using the settings that we set up in this environment. Now that we have our environment active, I'm actually going to go ahead and install some libraries for it. So the first one we're going to use is pip install discord.py. Discord.py we're going to use to do the Discord related stuff. I mean, that's pretty obvious. The second one is a bit less obvious. Pip install python-env. This is basically just going to help us with environment variables. Now, you don't have to worry too much about what that is right now. Just know that our application is going to store a bunch of important information, but we want to store that information somewhere else to keep it a bit more secure and safe. So we're going to use that library for that. And I do think that should be all. You can actually just close this terminal now because we're done with it. So we have the environment here, but now inside this, I'm going to go and right click. I'm going to click on new, and I'm going to create a text document. Now, I'm not sure if you see the .txt on your side, but if you don't, go to view and then go to show file name extensions. This should be checked. I'm going to right click on this text document because I want to rename it. We're basically just going to create the Python file now. This is going to be the file where the bot's code is going to be stored. Don't call it discord.py because that might conflict with the library we installed. I'm going to call mine mybot.py. Enter. Just click yes. And there we go. That's most of the setup done. One last thing is I want to show you how to use this inside of Visual Studio Code because that's where we're actually going to be writing the code. So I have it installed here. I'm just going to click it, open it, whatever. And I'm going to close this folder and I'm going to drag it here just so that we actually open everything here. There we go. Now, this is pretty important. I'm going to make this full screen. If we were to run this mybot.py file right now, we wouldn't be using the environment. So to actually use the environment, I want you to click Control-Shift-P. And then I want you to search for this option, Select Interpreter. You can just search it, Select Interpreter, whatever. It's there. You can search for it. It should be there. Click on it. And then you should see that the environment you created should be, I think, at the very top, or at least somewhere there. So select that, boom. And then every time I run my Python script now, it's going to use that environment. Okay, cool. So now we're going to write some Python code, and all of the code is going to go inside of this mybot.py file right here. We now get to the actual code that we need to write in order to get the bot to work. The first step is to import all the libraries that we'll be using. We import OS so that we can easily make use of operating system functionality. We'll make use of this library to load in our bot's token from another file. I'll talk more about the token later. We also import Discord because we need to actually interact with the Discord API. We also need to do these two imports because our bot is going to be using commands. The bottom one allows us to add parameters to our bot's /commands. And finally, we also import .env to help with our bot's token. Now, what is this token in the first place? Every Discord bot has its own unique token, and in order to control your bot through code, you need to tell your code what Discord bot to actually control in the first place, which is achieved using the token. This, of course, means that anyone that has access to your token will be able to control your bot. So make sure nobody else has access to this token. Many times people ask me questions and then they send their code on my public Discord server, but their token is still visible in the code that they share. Please don't do this. Anyone else that sees this code will be able to control your bot. Now, how do we actually get our code to connect with the bot we created earlier? Well, we need to go back to the developer portal, and then under this bot tab, we'll regenerate the token and then copy it. Keep in mind that every time you regenerate the token, you'll have to copy and paste it into your project again. Back in our project, we can create a file called .env. This file will store our bot's token, and our code will read the token from this file. The reason we use a .env file is because it's a lot safer and more secure than just doing a direct copy and paste into our bot's code. Inside of the .env file, we write discord_token equals, and then after the equal sign, paste the token. Back in our code, we write the following two lines. The first one will load the .env file we just created, and the second will retrieve the token variable that we just created. So our token is now stored inside of this token variable. We can then create our bot's intents. Intents are the permissions that the bot has on the server. And before we can bring our bot to life, we need to specify what permissions it'll have. This first line creates an intents object that will basically store the configuration for the permissions. In order to set the bot's permissions, we basically have to change this object. And that's exactly what this second line does. The second line changes the message content intent to true, meaning that the bot will be able to read and handle messages. A quick note has to be made here because some of the intents you will enable will require you to additionally enable them on the developer portal too. These intents are called privileged intents, and the message content intent happens to be one of them. We can create the actual bot object. This object represents our Discord bot. We need to pass in a command prefix argument in case we ever want to use prefixed commands. Prefixed commands are those commands that you can type into the Discord chat to make the bot do something, like !P to make the bot play music or something. You could make this empty because in the upcoming tutorials we'll be using / commands instead of prefixed commands, but it is best practice to include a prefix anyway, even if you plan on never using it. And in case you don't know what / commands are, they're the commands that pop up when you type /. All those commands you see are / commands. In our bot's creation code, we also need to tell the bot to use the intents object we just created, so that the bot may expect to use these permissions. We're almost ready to run our code and see our bot come online, but we need to write code to actually make the bot come online first, and we'll do this by creating code for the bot's startup event. We can do this by adding an event decorator and then changing the bot's onReady event. You might be asking yourself what an event is in the first place, so let me explain. An event is literally just something that happens inside the Discord server. For example, every time a user joins the server, the onMemberJoin event gets called. Every time a user joins a voice channel, the corresponding event will get called. Every time a user sends a message, an event will get called, and so on. Everything that happens on the server has an event connected to it, and we can listen for these events and run some code every time these events happen function. The onReady event is actually a bit more special and is just an event that runs when the bot comes online and is ready to start doing its job. The function that handles what the bot should do after a certain event is called an event handler, and we're currently working with the onReady event handler, which means the code inside of this function will get called once the bot is ready. As for the decorator at the top here, that's just so Discord knows we're working with an event handler. All we're going to do for now is to display our bot's information in the terminal when the bot comes online. To actually run our bot, we need to write bot.run and pass our token into the parameter. Once this is done, we can actually run our code for the first time, and if we give it a second to set everything up, we should see our bot come online in the terminal, which means that if we go to Discord itself, we should also see the bot online here. So congrats to you if you've gotten everything to work up until this point. Back in our code, to make the bot stop running, we click the trash icon here at the bottom right. We have our bot fully set up now, and the code you're seeing on the screen is the code we'll be using to create the future bots in this series. I do, however, want to show a few more things that'll be useful later on. One important event is the onMessage event, and it gets called whenever a user sends a message to the Discord server. I want to create an event handler for this event that'll basically just make the bot reply whenever someone sends a message on the server. Every time we create an event handler, remember to add the event decorator. After this, we add the event handler function itself, and it has one parameter, which we'll call MSG for message. This is the message that got sent. Inside of the function, we should check to make sure that we're not taking the bot's messages into account. Otherwise, the bot will send a message and then read its own message and then send another message. This process will repeat infinitely, so we need to make sure that all messages we process are not written by the bot. We do this by checking that the author of the message has a different ID compared to our bot's ID. Once we've made sure the message wasn't sent by our bot, we'll just write the following code to send a message to the same channel that the original message was sent in. That's what this code does. This code will send a message that says interesting message, and then it'll ping the user that sent the message. I know it's a bit dumb, but this is purely to show you how events work. If we run the bot and then go to the Discord server, we'll see that the bot comes online again. I'll go ahead and send a random message, and we should see how the bot responds to my message. So as you can see, the bot responds, and it even mentions me, which is pretty neat. Back in our code, remember to click the trash icon before writing any more code. There's one last thing I want to show you before explaining the discord.py documentation. I want to show a quick overview of a basic slash command. I'm going to copy and paste the code for a very basic slash command, which greets the user once the command is run, and then I'll explain what all the code does step by step. Before this code can work though, we need to make sure that all the bot's slash commands are visible on the server. To do this, we go to the onReady event handler and add the following line of code: await bot.tree.sync. Without this line, the slash commands won't appear on the servers where the bot is present, so it's important to have it included. When we look at the slash command code, you'll see mentions of a tree. So let's talk about what a tree command is. We've worked a bit with events so far, but slash commands work a little differently. Slash commands are organized into a command tree that the bot has. This means that all the slash commands you create will form part of this tree structure, which is basically just a fancy way of saying that the bot keeps track of all your slash commands in one organized place. On the first line, we have this decorator at bot.tree.command. This is basically telling our bot, hey, I want to create a new slash command and add it to your command tree. We then give the command a name, in this case greet, and a description so that when someone types /greet in Discord, they'll see what the command does right away. The next part is where we actually define the function that will run when the /greet command is used. We call this function greet, and as you can see, it receives a parameter called interaction of type discord.interaction. Now what exactly is this interaction thing? An interaction is basically a special type of object that Discord sends to our bot whenever someone uses a /command. Think of it like a package of information that tells our bot everything it needs to know about this specific command usage. For example, which user ran the command, in which channel the command was used, and a whole bunch of other useful details. In our code, we're making use of interaction.user.mention, which will retrieve the user that ran the command and mention them in the message we send back. The interaction object is basically our direct connection to the context of the command, the user, the channel, and more. We then respond back to the user by calling await interaction.response.sendMessage. This sends a message back to Discord as a reply to the user who triggered the /command. We write a greeting and use an f-string to insert the user's mention right inside the message. Because we're dealing with asynchronous code, just like the rest of discord.py, we make sure to use await before calling interaction.response.sendMessage. This ensures that our code waits for Discord to send the message before moving on. With all that said, let's run the bot one last time and then go go back to Discord to test the newly created / command. After waiting for the bot to come online, I'm going to type /greet. You should already see it coming up, so I'll just click it, and then the bot responds and greets me, which is pretty cool. For the last part of this video, I'd like to show you how to read and understand the discord.py documentation. Okay, so this is the official discord.py documentation. I'll leave this link in the description in case you want to check it out. So what I wanted to show you is this API reference here. If we go to this API reference, everything on this page is what Discord has to offer. So earlier in the video, I was talking about event handlers. Let's say you want to check out what all of the event handlers are. Well, you can use this left panel and then go to the event reference. These are the categories for all the events that there are. So if I go to messages, this one here, the on message event, is the one I used in the video. This one is for if someone edits a message, so you can use this event handler. This one is if someone deletes a message, and obviously the documentation doesn't just contain the events, it also contains other stuff you can do with discord.py. The point I'm trying to get across is that if you want to do anything in discord.py, then this should be one of the first places you consult. Obviously you could Google, you could even ask ChatGPT. I'm pretty sure it would give you a nice answer. All I'm saying is if you can't figure something out, just come to this documentation. It's actually pretty nice. This is more or less where we left off last time. Make sure that the only event handler you have is the onReady handler. I mentioned earlier that we'll be using a database to store the amount of warnings that each user has on a given server. First of all, what is a database anyway? A database is a collection of data that's distributed in one or more files. The reason we use databases is so that all data is in one place and so that we can easily get access to this data whenever we need it. Whenever someone uses profanity, our bot should detect that and then it should store the user's ID inside of the database, along with the number of warnings and the server where this occurred. In this video, we'll be using a warning count of 3 before a user gets banned, but this can easily be changed. The reason we also store the server is because the user might be on multiple servers with the same bot, and we don't want the user to be banned on all other servers, only the specific server where the user broke the rules. When a user gets 3 warnings, that user should only be banned on the server where the rules were broken, not all servers. I've made an example table to illustrate the idea. This is what our database could look like. You'll see that user number 1 is stored twice, but that's because this user is inside of 2 servers, and each server has its own warning count for this specific user. So if the user were to break the rules on server 1, then that would be 3 warnings, and they should be banned on server 1 only. So at the end, we know that we should ban user 1 on server 1 because they have 3 or more warnings. Another thing to note is that we'll be using SQL, which is a type of coding language that's used to retrieve information from a database. Imagine you have a database with thousands of entries. In order to retrieve the correct entries from the database, we need to write an SQL query to search for the exact row of information that we want. In order to work with the database, we need to make a new import. We'll import SQLite 3, which will allow us to handle all the database operations, and it'll allow us to write SQL queries to retrieve the needed information from the database. Before we write any Discord-related code, we'll first write some code that will help us work with the database. I'll create a function called createUserTable, which will basically just create a table in our database. There's a difference between the database itself, the tables, and the rows of data. In a database, all the rows of data are stored in tables, and those tables are then stored inside of the database. Tables are used to categorize data. So for example, if you own a grocery store, you could have an employees table that stores each employee in the store. All the employees would have their own row under the table. You could then also have a sales table which stores each sale that the store has made, and each sale would be stored as a row. A third table could be stock, which stores all the product you have, and each product you have in stock would be a row under this table. In our database, we only have one table, and it will be called users per guild. Each row in our table will have 3 values, which will be the example I used a bit earlier. We'll store the user ID, the number of warnings that the user has, along with the guild ID where the user has received these warnings. Additionally, we'll only store users that have 1 or more warnings. Otherwise, we need to unnecessarily store each user across each server where the bot resides, and that'll only take up unnecessary space. This means that every time a user uses profanity, we first need to check if they even have a record in our database. If not, we create their record with a warning count of 1. If they are in the database, however, then we just increase their warning count by 1. Every time you want to work with a database using SQLite 3, you need to create a connection to the database. And we can do this using the SQLite3.connect function. This code will try to connect to the database we specify here. But if it can't find this database file, then it will create one for us. Our database will be the file that this line of code creates. The only issue is this code might store our database in a folder different to the one where the Python file is stored. But I would like for the database to be stored in the same folder as the Python file. Otherwise, our database is going to be stored very inconsistently. In order to fix this, we need to write this code at the top. This will store the path to the folder where our Python file resides. We can then go ahead and change this line of code like this. This will prepend the path to our database so that it can get stored in the same folder as our Python. So let's go ahead and run the code. As you can see, it is now stored inside of the same folder. SQL code can also be used to create tables in our database, so that's exactly what we're going to do. But in order to execute SQL code in our database, we need to first create a cursor object. This object will execute any SQL code that we write. We can now finally create the table using SQL. And this is what that looks like. Cursor.execute is the function we use to write SQL code. The yellow part is the SQL itself. This code is saying that a table should be created if it doesn't already exist. The table should be called users per guild. This table should have 3 columns, which will be user ID, warning count, and guild ID. All of these columns will store integers. This means all of them will store numbers. In Discord, every user has a unique number ID associated with them. The same applies for the servers. Warning count will also be a number, obviously. This part at the bottom that says primary key will select both user ID and guild ID as the primary key. A primary key is a unique identifier that should be used to uniquely identify a row in our database. In our case, since we might store the same user twice or the same server twice, we make the primary key a combination of the two, because we'll never find the same user and the same server in one table. At least one of them will always differ from the rest. So if you add them together, then you can uniquely identify each row in our table. In most cases, however, you'll probably find that most tables in databases only have one primary key and not a combination. In our case, it's convenient to just make the primary key a combination of the two. We can then commit all the changes made to the database and close the connection. Make sure to call this function as well. If we run our code, we should see the database file appear in the same directory as the Python file. But you should notice that we can't really look at the content of the database. We need to use another program to actually look at the database itself. We'll do this a bit later, but for now, just know that the table we created is now stored inside of the database file. The table itself is still empty though, because we haven't stored any data yet. Now that our table is created, I can explain how we're going to implement the rest of our program. We're going to be using the onMessage event handler to check every message that gets sent on Discord. If we then detect any form of swearing or banned terms, we're going to query our database and add a warning to the user. We're then going to look at how many warnings this user has, and if they have 3 or more, then they get banned or kicked from the server. Before we do the actual profanity detection, let's handle the database side of things first. I'm going to add another function at the top here, and I'm going to call it increase and get warnings. This function will take both the user ID and the server or guild ID as arguments. This function is going to do exactly as the name states. It's going to increase the given user's warning count on the given server, and then it's going to return that number back to us so that we can check if it's higher than or equal to 3. First, we need to create the connection and instantiate a cursor object, exactly like before. Before anything else happens, we need to check if the user is already in the database. We can do this by executing the following query. This query is basically saying, get the warning count from the users per guild table that have the user ID and guild ID that we passed into the parameters of this function. The question marks here are placeholders. And then here, we're specifying what should be used instead of the question marks. This first question mark will take user ID and the second will take guild ID, because that's what we specified in the brackets here. When we pass arguments into the SQL query like this, it's important to do it the way we did. Otherwise, your query could be subject to SQL injection. SQL injection is a type of hack where users can gain access to your database, and that's obviously super bad. If you do your queries like this, then you shouldn't really have anything to worry about. This query is going to retrieve the warning count of the user that has a matching user ID and guild ID that we passed into the argument. To actually get this result, result, we need to store it in a variable and use cursor.fetch1, which will only retrieve the first row of the result. The query should just return one result anyway, but just to be safe, I'm using fetch1. You might have realized that we haven't committed this query like we did the previous one. This is because it's only necessary to commit queries that change the structure or data inside of the database. Retrieving information doesn't really affect the database at all. We're simply just searching for data, not changing it. This result variable will now store one of two things: either the number of warnings or an object called none, which means nothing. If it stores none, then it means the database doesn't have any entry for this specified user and server. So let's handle the case where the result is none first. We'll check if result is none, after which we need to execute another query where we're going to add the user to the database along with the server where the profanity took place. This is what the query looks like. All we're doing is inserting the user into the users per guild table, and then we're doing the thing with the question marks again. We then need to commit this request because we're changing the database by inserting a new entry. You can go ahead and close the connection and return 1. We're safe doing this because we already know the new user is going to have a warning count of 1, so returning the value 1 should be sufficient. Outside of the if statement, we can assume that the user is indeed stored inside of the database. So let's update their warning count by adding 1. The following query is going to update the entry inside of users per guild where the user ID and guild ID match our description given in the brackets below. The first question mark is the new warning count, which should be the old value plus 1. The reason we use square brackets here is because result actually stores a tuple of one item. So we need to access the item inside of the tuple. The second and third question marks are just the user and guild IDs. We can then commit the request, close the connection, and return the result we got earlier. But remember to add a plus 1 because result stores the old value before it was updated. Wow, we covered a lot about databases now. And trust me, we're almost done. But let's just make sure this function actually works. The next few lines of code isn't necessary because I'm only using it to test, but I'm going to call the function 4 times. 2 of them share the same user ID, but they're on a different server. And 2 of them are on the same server, but they're different users. When we run this code and it gives no errors, we should be able to safely assume that nothing went wrong. But we can actually double check by looking inside the database. Now, the only issue is you usually need other software to look at the contents of the database. The software I use is called DB Browser, and I'll very briefly show you how to use it to view the database we just created. Okay, so the software we're going to use for browsing the database is called DB Browser for SQLite. You can get it on this website here if you go to the download tab here. So back in the code, I'm actually going to delete this database just in case, and then I'm going to run this again because I've added a new line right here, which is going to add a warning to an existing user. Let me go search DB Browser. There we go. I've already installed it, but the setup should be pretty easy. Could try just dragging this over here, but that never works for me. So I'm going to right click here, reveal in File Explorer, and then that's what usually works if I drag it from File Explorer itself, not Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to drop this. I'm going to make this full screen actually. Here's the table we created, so we finally have some confirmation that it worked. If we go to browse data though, this is what we're interested in. We have all our users on all the servers here. That user that had 2 lines of code has 2 warnings, meaning that the warning count works. Alright, so I've closed DB Browser and I'm actually going to stop running the bot now. I'm also going to delete this database file because I don't want that to interfere with the rest of the program. I don't want the existing entries to stay there. So yeah, I'm also going to delete these lines. Okay, now it's time for the actual profanity handling of the video. Let's create a list of terms that we're going to label as profanity. The first one, poo-poo. The second, N-word. And the third is a word that I like to think I made up myself, only to find it everywhere on Urban Dictionary. Splorge. You can obviously put in your own terms and words, but this is what I'm choosing. Every time someone sends a message on the Discord server, the bot is going to check if it contains any of these terms. And then it's going to delete the message and give the user a warning, which also means the warning count is going to increase inside the database. Let's change the onMessage event handler. We'll use a for loop to go through every item in our profanity profanity list, and then we'll check if the term's lowercase form is inside of the message's lowercase form. Inside of this if statement, we can assume that the user used one of these banned terms, so we can, first of all, retrieve the number of warnings that this person has, as well as increase it. We obviously do this using the function we made earlier. Now we need another if statement, one that checks if the number of warnings is equal to or higher than 3. If the user has exceeded the number of warnings allowed, then we want to ban them using the .ban method. This method takes a parameter called reason, where we can specify the reason the user got banned. Mine will be exceeded 3 strikes for using profanity. This next line of code is optional, but we can then publicly specify to the server that the user has been banned. We can do this with the following line of code. This is how the bot sends messages. In our else statement, we'll send another message where we give the number of warnings that the user has used. Outside of this, we'll delete the message and then break the loop because we've already found profanity in the message. No need to look any further. Outside of the for loop, we have to write this line of code, which just allows other commands to process before continuing. That should really be it for our bot. We can go ahead and test it. Okay, before I want to run the bot, I actually just want to come here and press tab just once, because there's a good reason. This code here, when they do ban a user, they actually already delete the messages, but then it tries to delete the message again when this was originally here. So that causes an error. The bot still runs, but it causes an error which just, it doesn't look nice, and obviously if there's an issue you want to fix it. So yeah, just something small. But I'm going to run the code now, and then the database was created and the bot is online. So let's go to Discord and you can see the bot's online. I've created a bit of a setup here. I made an alternative account which I'm just going to use to test the bot. So on this server, I'm going to go, also I made 2 servers so we can test the banning. Here I'm going to type poo-poo, N-word, and then that's 2 out of 3 warnings, and then splorge. So I should be banned now. There we go. I've been banned on that server. Let's go to the other one and just try to get 1 warning, N-word. There we go. Right, so 1 out of 3 warnings now. I'm going to switch accounts just so I can get a variation of users as well. On this one, I'm going to say poo-poo, doesn't really matter which one I use. On this one, I'm going to say N-word. There we go. So now that should be a good variety of tests. Let's go to DB browser. And then, of course, we have to do it from here, File Explorer, not the other one. And there we go. So as you can see, we did have 1 ban, which is clearly this one because it has a warning count of 3. So it was on this server here, and it was this user. I'm not sure if I can show this information publicly. I probably can. Okay, so we can confirm that all of this is valid. Let's go back to VS Code. And we didn't get any errors, so that's good. Everything's working, so that's perfect. I'm going to stop the bot now. It's a good idea to download ffmpeg before we do anything else, because we're going to be using ffmpeg to stream the audio to Discord. So let's go to the page, let's go to download, and then under Windows, we're going to go to gian.dev. Once we're on this page, I'm going to download the essentials here. You can see the file has .7z as the file extension, which means it's a zipped folder. Now, my computer can already extract the folder, but there's a chance that you might be getting issues. So if you can't seem to extract, then you should try and download 7-zip or WinZip. But anyway, like I said, my computer can already extract this. So I'm going to drag it to desktop. I'm going to close this. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go to extract all and then extract. Once that's done, we have it open. And then I'm going to open the Discord bot folder, which is the entire project we've been making. And then inside of ffmpeg, I'm going to drag this bin folder inside of our Discord bot project. Now, this bin folder contains 3 exe files, but I'm pretty sure we're only going to be using the top one. But just in case, I'm still going to keep the bottom 2 here. I'm going to be a bit extra and I'm going to create another folder, which is called ffmpeg. I'm going to drag these files here. And the reason I'm doing this is because in a bunch of programs, or applications, people usually have a bin folder where all of the executable files go, so like the .exe files. And there's a chance that you might add to this project in the future, and there's also a chance that you might get a bunch of these bin folders that you need. So then, inside of your bin folder, it's probably going to look a bit ugly and messy if there's a bunch of exe files in this entire folder. So I'm just going to categorize them by a subfolder so that in the future we can add more folders here if we want to. I'm going to open Visual Studio Code, and then I'm going to drag this folder here. And you can also go ahead actually and delete this folder and the extracted one as well. Now there's one last thing I want to do before we can start coding, and that's clicking this button here at the bottom and then going to terminal, because we want to download another library. So pip install yt-dlp. It's going to say I've already installed it. Yep, there we go. But you should go ahead and install that because we're going to be using it to search for the user's song. So the basic workflow is going to be a user requests a song in Discord, and then our bot is going to use yt-dlp to search for that song on YouTube and create a stream of it. ffmpeg is then going to use that stream to play the audio on Discord. So that's the gist of it. We can close this by clicking the trash icon here, kill terminal. And now we can start coding. Now that we have ffmpeg set up and ready to go, we can write our first bit of code, which will be the play command. We will be using slash commands, of course. So the structure of our command will be /play and then our search query. For example, /play, never gonna give you up. Let's create the structure and definition for the command by using the command decorator. The command will have one parameter, which will be the search query. Now that our command is defined, we can provide the implementation. The first thing we want to do before the bot can play anything is to let Discord know that this command might take a while to execute. By default, we have about 3 seconds before the command is aborted, and downloading music might take slightly longer than that, so let's notify Discord that we might take longer than 3 seconds. We do this by typing await interaction.response.defer. We should then definitely get the voice channel that the user is currently in, so type voice channel equals interaction.user.voice.channel. But what if the user wasn't in any voice channel? Don't worry, we'll check if that's the case by typing if voice channel is none. Then send a message notifying the user to join a voice channel and return, since we don't want to execute any more code after this. If the voice channel turned out to be legit, we should then check if the bot itself is already inside of a voice channel by retrieving the voice client of the bot in the current server. A voice client is basically an entity that can interact with voice channels in Discord. So if the bot has a voice client, then it means the bot is connected to a voice channel. If not, then we should make the bot join. The following code does exactly that for us. It checks if voice client is none, meaning it has to connect. Just remember to also reset voice client to be the new instance. But if the bot is connected, we should make sure it's in the same channel as the user that sent the /play command. So we then say voice client.move to, and then the voice channel we retrieved above. We've written a good amount of code now, and we're ready to start playing a song, but there's one problem. How do we actually play something? For this, we'll use two things. Firstly, ffmpeg. Secondly, we'll need a way to somehow search for the user's song request on the internet, specifically on YouTube. For this, we're going to use a library called yt-dlp. I'll import it inside of our project. Back in our play command, we can specify the settings or options that we'd like to use when we do the actual search query. So I'll paste the options I've selected and go through each one. If you want to choose your own options, feel free to look at the yt-dlp documentation. I'll leave a link in the description. The first option specifies that we're only interested in the audio of our search, and to specifically download our audio using 96 kilobits per second or less. If it can't find such audio, it will use the best audio. The second option will exclude all playlists from our search. The third and fourth options will basically just omit some information from our download that we're not interested in, to hopefully speed up and simplify our download. We can then go ahead and construct our search query that's going to be used on YouTube to search for our song. We'll type query equals, and then in quotations, yt-search:1 plus the song query. The reason we add the yt-search1 is so that the search will only look for the top result. You can change the number if you want, but for our bot, it will be unnecessary because we'll only be using the first result that comes up in our search. The next step is to use the options to search for the song, and I'm going to do it in a separate function because I want the function to be asynchronous, meaning it runs at the same time as our other code. The reason for this is because when we actually implement a queuing system and we add songs to the queue, yt-dlp is going to download songs while other songs are playing, and this might cause some bad audio quality on the currently playing song, so that's why I'm going to make make the actual search a separate function that runs in the background. At the very top, I'll import async.io so that we can perform asynchronous operations. I'm going to paste the two functions we'll use to search our song near the top of our project, and then I'll explain what they do. First of all, I think it's important to note that the bottom function, extract, is the one doing all the search work, and the top function, search yt-dlp async, is the one handling the concurrent execution of things. The top function will retrieve the current loop that's executing, and then it will create a separate thread from this loop that executes on its own. The thread will run the bottom function that actually does the YouTube search for the audio. Inside of it, we pass our yt-dlp options and then perform the search. The false value here is to specify that we don't want to download the song. We're only interested in streaming it. Then we extract the information and return it to the top function, which then returns it to wherever we call the function. Now that the function is written, we'll go back to our play command and retrieve the result of our search query and store it in a variable called results. After this, we can get the tracks. These will be the actual songs. We'll probably have to check the case where no search results come up, so we can do that by checking if tracks is none. And if that's the case, send a message on Discord notifying the user that their search came back empty. To get the first track, and really the only track because of the query limiting here, we'll use index 0 on tracks. The audio URL that ffmpeg is going to use to stream the music is stored inside of the dictionary using the URL key, and the title we can retrieve like this. The title here stores the actual title of the audio that's been downloaded. So our search is done and we've downloaded the requested song, but how do we actually play it? Well, we have to specify some ffmpeg options first, similar to how we did the yt-dlp options. Then we have to create a source for the audio that Discord can use to play it. And then finally, we can use the voice client to play the audio. So firstly, here are the ffmpeg options that I'll be using. The before options section mainly deals with how the audio might deal with connectivity issues or reconnection behavior. The first one, reconnect 1, means that the bot will try to reconnect to the audio source if connection was lost. The second is the same as the first, but for streamed media, which is what we're actually using, but I decided to include both anyway. The max delay here is the maximum delay in seconds between reconnection attempts. Then there's the main ffmpeg options. -vn disables video processing. -c:(a) libopus specifies that we want to use the opus codec to encode audio streams, which is a modern and efficient audio codec. This part sets the audio bitrate to 96 kilobits per second. Then we can create the source for our audio that Discord can use. We'll be using ffmpeg opus audio, where we'll pass the URL of the audio, the ffmpeg options, as well as specifying the path to the ffmpeg.exe we downloaded at the very start of the video, which will be inside of bin/ffmpeg. Now that that's done, you can play the audio using voiceclient.play and then passing the source. Before testing the bot, it's important to note that slash commands don't always appear on servers immediately. It might take up to an hour even. So don't worry if your command isn't visible yet. To make it instantly appear, you need to get the server's ID first. So let's add a temporary event handler that will print the server's ID whenever a message gets sent. Let's run the bot and send a message. In our terminal, the server's ID is now displayed, so we can copy it and store it in a variable at the very top of our code. You can then delete the event handler. Okay, so I had to come back and say some stuff because there was a mistake in the video. We have the guild ID now that we're going to use for the test server. There's still 3 things we have to do to make the bot work. The first one is to set the test guild here in the onReady event. So add this line of code, then set the guild parameter to test guild. This will make sure that all the slash commands you have sync in that server. And once you're done testing, you can take away this line of code and also take away this parameter right here. And then of course you also don't need this one anymore. The other thing, which wasn't giving issues before, but for some reason is now, we have to actually install another library. So do this, pip install pynacl, and then press enter. I'm pretty sure it's because this project's in a virtual environment. And when I was testing before, I wasn't using a virtual environment, so it could be that. You can click the trash icon. The last thing is actually something that we have to do in Discord. I'm going to kick the bot because I'm going to re-invite it in the Discord developer portal. So boom, and then applications. The reason is, and then I'm going to go to the tutorial bot. The reason is I invited the bot with the wrong permissions, or the wrong scopes, sorry. So we need, where is it? Obviously we need bot, but we also need applications.commands. There we go. I, for some reason, didn't check that, but make sure to check that, and then it supports slash commands. I'm then going to copy the link, go to a new tab and paste. And then I'm going to go to Discord and invite the bot to test server. There we go, authorize. There we go, I'm human. And there we go, the bot's here. All right, and that should be all you have to do. If we run the bot and go to Discord, we can join a voice channel and type /play and then our query, then press enter. You might have to wait a second for the audio to download, but after a few seconds, it should start playing your song. Congratulations if you've gotten everything to work up until this point. In a sense, we've already created the most basic form of a music bot in Discord. But obviously, some more features would be nice. So before adding pause, skip, and all of that, let's focus on a queuing system. For the queuing system, I'm going to make use of Python dictionaries and a queue data structure. What I plan on doing is to use the dictionary to store the server IDs as the keys and the actual music queues as the values. So at the very top, I'll import dq from collections, which will give us the queue, and then I'll define a dictionary here called song queues, which will store the queues of all the individual servers. Inside the play command, we can copy the ffmpeg code as well as the source code because we want to move this to another function. We'll call this function play next song, and it'll take in a voice client, a guild ID, and a channel. This function will handle the logic for when the next song should play. So what will happen is we'll end up calling this function every time a song ends and another is ready to play. So we'll say if there's songs contained in the song queues dictionary for the given server ID, create the audio URL and the title from the dictionary. Our dictionary will store each song's audio URL as well as the title. We can then paste the ffmpeg options as well as the source creation code here. The next step is to play the song. So we'll say voiceClient.play. Here's where we have to do some thinking. This play function has a parameter called after, where we can pass a function that should run after a song has ended. You'd expect us to pass the function we've just made so that the bot can check the queue again. There's a slight issue with this, unfortunately. The after parameter can't send its own arguments to the function we specify. And this is important because, as you can see at the top here, we have 3 parameters that we need to pass, and we can't pass any of them into the function inside of the after parameter. So here's what we'll do. Above this, we'll create another function called after play that takes error as a parameter. This is essential because the after parameter function needs to have one parameter, which will be the error message. Inside of the function, we'll display a message if an error occurred, and more importantly, we'll call the play next song function from here. This line is telling our bot to run the play next song function synchronously from the bot's event loop. Our after parameter can then run this function after a song has ended. The reason we declared the function inside of the same function we were busy with is so that it has access to the voice client, guild ID, and channel arguments. We can then use asyncio.createTask to asynchronously send a message to the Discord channel saying that the next song is playing. We'll also have an else statement here at the bottom to disconnect the bot if there's no songs, and to reset the song queues dictionary for the given server. This function will correctly play the next song in a queue, but we haven't really done the logic for queuing the songs yet. So let's do that. In the play command, we can take away all of this and then get the guild ID as a string because we'll obviously be using this as the key in the dictionary. Then we'll check if this specific server has a queue ready, and if not, then create one. After this, we can add the song to the queue, and we do it using the append function to add it to the queue structure in the dictionary. We can then use an if-else statement to check if there's a song currently busy, and if so, just send a message telling the user that the song was added to the queue. Otherwise, tell the user that the song is now playing, and then call the function we created below. That should be all the code for the queue logic, but to test it, we might as well add the skip command. I'll paste the whole command here, and really the only thing to take away from this is that here it checks to see if there's something playing, similar to the check we did in the play command, and then it stops the music if there's something playing. This will trigger the function we set in the after parameter, so basically the play next song function. For our music bot, we're going to add 3 more features. These will be pause, resume, and stop. I'm going to paste all of them one by one and then explain. Luckily, they aren't too long, so it should be easy. The first one will be pause, which will check if the user is in a voice channel and whether or not something is playing. After we've confirmed that there is in fact a song playing, we'll call voiceClient.pause to pause the currently playing audio. Pretty simple function, and every pause feature needs a resume feature. So let's go ahead and paste that. The resume feature is basically an exact copy of the pause feature, except we're just resuming, obviously, by typing voiceClient.resume. The last function will be called stop, and it will stop the entire voice client altogether and and clear the queue. This first part makes sure that the voice client is connected to a channel. After that, the following chunk of code clears the entire queue for the given server by using the .clear function. The next step is to stop the audio from playing and then ultimately disconnect the voice client from the channel. You can then optionally send a message notifying the user. We've covered a huge amount of code in this single video, so let's go ahead and make sure it even works. Okay, so I made a few mistakes in the stop command. It takes a while to complete all of its tasks, so we once again have to use the response.defer method. I then changed all of the messages being sent to use the follow-up.send method. And then the last thing I did was switch these two around, which I'm not too sure why that works, but it works a lot better than if it disconnected first and then sent a message. I'm gonna run, and then we're gonna go to Discord. I'm already in a voice channel here. I'm gonna do /play Vine Boom 10 hours. But the silence one was really stupid. I don't want that one. I want one which consistently plays Vine Boom because I want to hear if the bot's working. Okay, so it does take a second, just by the way. Okay, there we go. That's exactly what I wanted. Okay, might take a second for this one to download, but you could hear it was working. Okay, there we go. Okay, now I'm gonna play to add some more things to the queue. I'm gonna do fart sounds, just because. And while we're at it, I'm gonna test the pause. So let's test pause. And just by the way, it's been added to queue now, so that's good. And it's been paused, so that's great. I'm then gonna do resume. Okay, perfect. And then I'm gonna do skip. There we go. Perfect. And then the last one I'm gonna do stop. There we go. Everything works. Perfect. Before we do the hosting, let's discuss some important things first. Hosting something on the internet really just means you're using another computer somewhere in the world to run your code. There's many reasons for wanting to do this, but in this video, the main reason will be to keep our bot online 24/7. We'll be using Render to host our bot, but since this is completely free, it does have some drawbacks that we'll get into later. Another thing to keep in mind is that if you want to host an advanced bot, like a music bot or so, it's best not to use free hosting because your bot won't work properly and you'll run into a lot of issues. I would recommend some of the following services if you're willing to pay a bit of money for a serious bot. The cheapest option I could find is called Sparked Host, which has an option for $1 a month. I've never used them before, but I've seen good reviews on them. They have a free trial that I would recommend using before purchasing anything. Another option is Heroku or Replit, both of which are super beginner friendly. Heroku has a pricing option of $7 per month and Replit $15 per month. There are many other options available, but for this video, we'll stick to Render. Okay, so I'm in the project and there's a few things I've changed. So first of all, the mybot.py now stores just a very basic bot. Every time you send a message, regardless of what the message contains, the bot's just going to reply with interesting messages. This is just so we can test if the bot's actually working. Now there are a few things I've added. You might have noticed this keepalive.py file right here. If we inspect this is just a basic Flask application that I've added. And the entire point of this is to make our Discord bot a web application that we can then ping from an external service like Uptime Robot. The reason we're doing this, because if the bot doesn't get any requests or activity, then after a certain amount of time it's going to shut down. So this is just going to help us keep the bot alive, basically. That's why it's called Keep Alive. And now when we go to my bot, we can import it like this. These two lines of code here are the ones you're going to have to add to your code to get that to work. So first of all, we're importing it, and then we're just running that function that we defined here. So this function is basically going to run the Flask application on a separate thread. But now we need to go and host the bot on some servers. Now, like I've said, I chose Render because they do have a free option, but keep this in mind. I've already said this, but every single free option has its limitations. Like if we were paying for some hosting service, then we wouldn't even need this keepalive.py in the first place. and we could easily upload our music or moderation bot. Now for render, we actually need a file called requirements.txt, which has all of the Python libraries in that file, just so that render knows which libraries we're using. And there's a way to generate this file, so make sure you're using the virtual environment that we created in the very first video. If you didn't make a virtual environment, you could follow the steps, but just know that there might be some libraries in there that aren't actually even part of the Discord bot, that are just part of your Python system. But regardless, you want to go to the bottom left here. Actually, before we do that, press Ctrl, Shift, and P, and then select Interpreter, and make sure you have that virtual environment selected. So I'm just going to click it, just in case it wasn't, but I can see at the bottom right here that it is selected. And then go to this button here, go to Terminal. Let's just stop that, and type pip freeze, and then an arrow to the right, requirements.txt, and then press enter. Now that's going to use the virtual environment to then export all of the libraries that we have. So let's go to requirements.txt, and I'm going to actually kill this terminal. And as you can see here, this is everything that's in this virtual environment. Now, I'm sure some of these aren't even useful. I'm sure that some of these are just part of the environment, but the ones that we installed for this virtual environment were yt-dlp. That was for the music bot. We don't even really need that anymore, so I'm actually going to go ahead and delete that. pynacl, I think you only need that for music bots, but I'm going to keep it in there just in case. Flask we need, discord.py we need. Yeah, okay, so I think we need the rest. Now that we have the requirements.txt, we can go to Chrome, and this is what render looks like, the home page. Now I want you to click on Get Started for free. You're going to have to go ahead and create an account, but I already have one, so this I think should just log me in. Okay, yeah, so it just took me to the main page. Okay, so I want you to click on Deploy a Web Service. Okay, so here we're going to have to do some steps outside of render. I want you to go to a website called GitHub. I'll leave links to everything in the description, by the way. Okay, now if you don't have an account, I want you to go ahead and create one. And then I want you to create a new repository. So you should see a plus button somewhere. For me, it's here. I'm going to click on New Repository. You can call this anything. I'm just going to call this test. Actually, no. Tutorial bot, just like that. I'm going to make this private because I don't want anyone else to see this repository. And that's about it. I'm going to go ahead and create this repository. GitHub's basically just a place where you can store your projects. We are going to store our entire Discord bot in GitHub so that we can then retrieve the project from GitHub on render. So in GitHub, we can upload files by just clicking on this upload existing file. Just so you know, we are inside of the repository now. This is the repository you can see at the top left here, but I'm going to go to upload an existing file, and it's going to take me to this upload page where I'm going to go to Visual Studio Code, just like this. I'm going to make this a bit smaller like that. I want to open this in File Explorer because I don't think I can. Yeah, no, I can't just drag. So I'm going to have to right click and then reveal in File Explorer. So here's our project. The ones I'm going to upload are just these three. So I'm going to upload. It's the keep alive, the requirements we made earlier, and the actual bot itself. Okay, and then scroll down, commit changes. Okay, and now our bot is on GitHub. Okay, so this is more or less what your render should look like. So I'm going to click on GitHub, and then it's going to ask you to sign in. So I'm just going to choose my account. Okay, so you might have to authenticate some stuff to actually get into GitHub. But I had to type a code into my phone, but you're probably going to have something else. Scroll down. Now here, only select repositories. You can actually select the repositories that you want render to see. So I'm going to select, and then for me, oh my goodness, okay. For me, it's going to be tutorial bot, that one. I'm going to take this test away. That was me testing earlier. And then we're going to click on save. Okay, so once the tab closes, you'll see that we have access to the repository we just made. Now I'm going to click on this and then click on connect. That's basically just going to take everything from that GitHub and drag it over to render. So you can give your project a name or your web service. I'm actually gonna keep it tutorial bot. Make sure this is Python 3. branch, make sure that's main. The region, I'm just going to keep the same. So this part's pretty important. This command is going to be executed on render, which is then going to download all of the requirements using the requirements.txt file we made earlier. And the start command is the thing that's going to run our bot. We can type python3 space and then mybot.py. Python3 is basically the command you use to run a Python script. And it takes one parameter, which is the name of the file. If we go to GitHub, you'll see it's called mybot.py. So make sure this is exactly spelled the same as whatever your bot's name is. And now make sure to click on free, otherwise you're going to be prompted to give render some money. And now we get to environment variables. Now this is pretty important. We're going to token like that. This is the same as the bot that we made. So if we go to the .env here, let me just make that smaller. You'll see that it's called Discord token. Now we're creating that environment variable on render. So go ahead and copy your token and paste it here inside of value. I feel like I've said this enough, but I'll just say it again. Make sure to never share this token with anyone else. Otherwise they can control your bot. The reason I'm showing it is because this is a tutorial. And then you can go ahead and click on deploy web service here at the bottom left. If we scroll down, this is going to show the terminal or the output, or I guess the build log is what they call it. This is basically showing you how render sets up your bot behind the scenes. So we'll just wait a bit. It says it's been successful, but it still has to deploy. So we'll wait for that. Okay, so after you've waited a few minutes or seconds, I guess it depends. If you see this live at the top here, then you know everything's fine. Your bot's actually online at the moment. Okay, so if we go to Discord and I type anything, the bot should see and respond to that. Oh no, it responded twice. Okay, that's not good. Let's just send another one. Okay, but we aren't completely done yet. Okay, so as you can see here, it says your free instance will spin down with inactivity. So we want a way to keep this alive. So I want you to go to Uptime Robot. It's this website right here. And I want you to create an account. Okay, so once you've created an account on Uptime Robot, this option here is saying that we're going to ping a website. Okay, so the link that we're going to ping is this one right here. So let's copy that, go to Uptime Robot, and then paste. Let's just paste the whole thing because otherwise we're going to have double HTTPS. And then you can click, actually, before we do that, let's do a /, because if we go to the code, you'll see that this route is the one that has /. That's what we want to ping. So let's go to create monitor, and now it says monitor created. So let's just skip this. Yeah, just skip all of this and then take me to dashboard. Okay, so I feel like my laptop's about to explode because it's making a lot of loud noise. But if you can bear with me, if we click on this, then it says that the current status is up, and it's been up for 3 minutes 30 seconds, which means that it's successfully pinging our bot I think it's every 5 minutes, yeah. So here, every 5 minutes, which means technically we could close Chrome completely now. Let's close this. Let's go to Discord, and then let's send another message. And the bot, there we go, it replies. And this time it does reply with one message. All right, so the next ping has occurred. I'm just going to send another message like that. And the bot still responds, so that's great. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please remember to like the video, subscribe, turn on notifications, and check out my other social media for updates on the projects I'm currently working on. If you'd like to support me, then please also consider checking out my Patreon account. Thanks so much. I hope to see you in the next video.